It's been a few years, so I decided to do a reread of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. And this time, more than ever, something about our housekeeper narrator, Nelly Dean, just did not sit right with me. Wuthering Heights might be one of the most wildly interpreted novels in the English language, but today, I want to offer a very different angle. What if Nelly Dean isn't just an unreliable narrator, but the quiet villain of Wuthering Heights? Not in the melodramatic, cackling murderer in the corner sense, more as a caretaker whose resentment, choices, omissions, and carefully curated storytelling help create and then justify the tragedy we read. I'm not saying Emily Brontë sat down and thought, I shall make Nelly secretly evil. What I am saying is that the text leaves enough cracks and odd narrative choices that if you step through them, another version of the story emerges. So let's talk why Nelly Dean is the perfect person to tell this story, and the perfect person to distort it. So our first question is, why Mr. Lockwood? This is the guy that Nelly's telling the whole story to. Why would Nelly retell decades of trauma to a tenant she barely knows? Why give him every detail, every secret, every private moment? Maybe because he's the safest audience imaginable. Lockwood is oblivious, gullible, socially awkward, a terrible judge of character, and absolutely desperate to be seen as insightful. He thinks Heathcliff is a gentleman because he wears a dark coat. He brushes off Catherine's ghost as a nightmare. He misreads every social cue, every tone, every look. He is the perfect person to absorb Nelly's narrative, memorize her version of events, and then repeat them to us with total sincerity. Lockwood isn't just framing the story, he's laundering Nelly's conscience. And that brings us to what exactly she's cleaning up. Early in the novel, we get the tiniest glimpse of another narrator entirely, Catherine in Catherine's diary. Lockwood finds it and reads a few entries, and for the briefest moment, we hear Catherine in her own childish voice before Nelly rewrites everything. So what do we see here? Two abused children, Hindley's cruelty, Heathcliff upset, Catherine trying to protect him. It's the one part of the story Nelly doesn't control. And it shows us a different Catherine, caring, frightened, protective, terrified of adult violence. This diary is the first crack in Nelly's mask. Here's another. Nelly is the same age as Catherine Earnshaw. We tend to picture Nelly as this sensible, middle-aged housekeeper hovering wisely in the background. But during Catherine and Heathcliff's entire childhood and adolescence, Nelly is right there with them, a teenage girl, with her own jealousy, crushes, opinions, and grudges. She strongly dislikes Catherine. She openly disapproves of her. And that matters because when Catherine's life begins to spiral, Nelly is the one in charge of her food, her comfort, her communication, her access to her husband, and ultimately, her medical care. A young woman who resents Catherine is suddenly gatekeeping everything around her. We never really see who Nelly is outside the servant role. Did she ever have romantic feelings herself for one of these men, Hindley, or later Edgar? We don't know. What we do know is she spends her entire life trapped between these two houses. She never marries, we never see her start her own family, she witnesses unbelievable abuse, and never leaves for other work. It starts to feel less like loyalty and more like a self-imposed purgatory, like she can't escape the ghosts of the past because she's part of what created them. So what if Catherine's death was preventable? Many readers have very little sympathy for Catherine in her final chapters. They see her as melodramatic, manipulative, a victim of her own emotional storms. But that's exactly how Nelly wants us to see her. Catherine is already physically and mentally deteriorating by the time we hear her speak at length. And this story never really shows us any tenderness from her toward her pregnancy, her baby, or her own health, which, for someone as theatrical as Catherine, is strange. So let's slow down, go back into the text, and watch what actually happens around Catherine's crisis. If we need key evidence, this is it. The moment Catherine locks herself in her room after the fight between Heathcliff and Edgar. In just a few chapters, Nelly makes a series of decisions that quietly but dramatically alter the course of the entire novel. After the fight, Catherine tells Nelly, "Say to Edgar, if you see him again tonight, that I'm in danger of being seriously ill. I wish it may prove true. He has startled and distressed me shockingly. I want to frighten him." This line is usually read as pretty manipulative. Oh, she's just using her illness as a weapon. But remember, Catherine has been gravely ill before. The doctor has already warned she would not bear crossing much. So when she says she's in danger, she may genuinely be fearing a relapse. She wants Edgar reminded that provoking her has consequences. She wants Nelly to deliver that message. Nelly decides she knows better. She refuses, and she tells us explicitly, "I did not want him to yield, though I could not help being afraid in my heart." That is huge. She admits she was afraid something was wrong. She was asked to warn Edgar. She knew the doctor's past advice, and she still said nothing because she didn't want Catherine to win. This isn't passive oversight, it's an active choice. The confrontation worsens. When Edgar sees blood on his wife's lips and panics, Nelly whispers, "There is nothing in the world the matter." She reassures him. It's an act, a scene that Catherine planned beforehand. Catherine can barely stand, and yet Nelly still frames it as a performance. Then comes the most revealing line in this whole stretch. "I went about my household duties, convinced that the Grange had but one sensible soul in its walls, and that lodged in my body." That tells us everything. Nelly believes she is the only sane, rational, trustworthy person in the house. That belief gives her permission, in her mind, to override. Which, frankly, she's not in a position to do so. But she overrides Edgar, Catherine, the doctor, basic compassion, and the literal instructions she was given. It's classic controlling caretaker logic. I know best. I get to decide what happens here. After this, Catherine locks herself in her room. Edgar disappears into his books. No one checks on her. Nelly narrates, "Mrs. Linton, on the third day, unbarred her door, and having finished the water in her pitcher and decanter, desired a renewed supply, and a basin of gruel, for she believed she was dying." Let's underline this. 3 days, no food, all her water consumed, no sleep, fever, delirium. "I believe I am dying." And Nelly's reaction? "I could not get rid of the notion that she acted a part of her disorder." Even with all that physical evidence, Nelly clings to her original impression. Next, the window scene, in the most haunting line. Catherine begins raving. She longs for the moors, for being half savage and hardy and free again. She begs Nelly, "Open the window again wide, fasten it open, quick. Why don't you move?" Nelly answers, "Because I won't give you your death of cold." And Catherine snaps back, "You won't give me a chance of life, you mean?" On one level, yes, it's Catherine being dramatic. On another level, it's chillingly accurate. Nelly isn't directly harming her, but she also isn't giving her a chance at relief or help or survival. In a way, that line could stand as the thesis of this whole reading. Edgar finally arrives after this, and Nelly says, "When to my consternation, I heard the rattle of the doorbell, and Mr. Linton entered." Consternation. Not relief, not thank goodness, not finally someone who can help. She's literally trying to drag her back in out of the freezing cold winter air. She's hanging out the window. Her own strength hasn't been enough to pull her back. And yet she says consternation. She's anxious, not about Catherine's condition, but about being seen and questioned. Edgar goes on to say what we're now thinking. Not to give me one hint of how she has been these 3 days, it was heartless. He's right. He continues to scold her, and eventually Nelly goes to fetch a doctor. On her way, Nelly pauses, notwithstanding my hurry, to examine something pale moving in the dark. She doesn't want to later imagine it was some ghostly creature. It turns out to be Isabella's little dog, tied up and almost suffocated by a handkerchief. At its last gasp, Nelly saves it, quickly, decisively. And then she wonders what mischievous person could have treated it so. It's not hard to read this as a mirror. A helpless creature, left hanging, barely clinging to life. Saved because someone finally intervened. Meanwhile, Catherine, a woman Nelly dislikes, has been metaphorically left hanging at that bedroom window for 3 days, starving, fevered, hallucinating. And Nelly did not intervene in time. Even the phrasing, "what mischievous person had treated it so," lands eerily because the mischievous person in Catherine's case is arguably Nelly. Alright, so when you slow down and actually sit with these chapters, it's hard to see Catherine's end as some mystical, unavoidable destiny. It starts to look less like fate and more like a chain of human decisions, with Nelly at every link. So this leads us to the mirrored end. Catherine's end. Refusing food, weakening, mental collapse, all contributing to her death at childbirth. Heathcliff's end. Very similar, but in reverse. Both times, Nelly is the witness. Both times, she is the caregiver. Both times, she controls who knows what and who gets involved. She tells us Heathcliff would not eat, that he pushed food away. We only know what Nelly says happened in that room. She claims she placed food near him and he refused it, but by this point, he's so weakened that placing it nearby may not be meaningful at all. Now, I'm not saying she poisoned him or anything like that, but if you want to push this theory a little further, you can ask, what again is Nelly not telling us? Just as she chose so many times throughout the novel, is Nelly telling everyone, well, he wouldn't eat, a kind of passive way of letting him waste away? Especially when she's seen someone waste away like this before. She has every reason to resent him. His absence will make life easier for young Cathy and Hareton. And maybe this is her own dark way of righting her first wrong by doing it again, but this time for the good of young Cathy and Hareton. It's a darker, more speculative part of the theory, and you absolutely don't have to buy it, but as a kind of Gothic symmetry, it's hard not to notice two people both fading away under the same narrator's watch. Two stories, both framed as inevitable, poetic even. And one woman telling us how it all happened. The more you sit with this, the more it starts to feel like this entire narrative is Nelly's confession, disguised as a family saga. Maybe it's not just Catherine or Heathcliff haunting the Grange. Maybe the ghost that hangs over the moors is Nelly Dean's guilt. So that's this version of the Nelly Dean theory. Not necessarily the intended reading, but one the text quietly supports if you tilt your head and look at it sideways. At one point, Catherine in delirium even says, "Ah, Nelly has played traitor. Nelly is my hidden enemy, you witch." Is that her madness, or has she seen the mask slip? I didn't start piecing this together until the very end of my reread, so I'm sure there's a lot more in the novel that either supports or complicates this idea. Either way, I'd love to know in the comments below anything that you notice. And do you think that Nelly is negligent, manipulative, heroic, just doing her job? Or do you see her as a woman coping with guilt the only way she knows how, by telling a story where she comes out as the only sensible soul in the house? If you enjoyed this, my 2 previous episodes also dive into Wuthering Heights and Heathcliff from different angles. And they have a lot more images and videos. It's a little short on time for this one. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more literary and historical deep dives here on Meet the Muse. Thank you for watching.